This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.
The human condition is one that is capable of love, and is capable of hate. It's capable of anger. It's capable of compromise. It's capable of understanding, and it's capable of misunderstanding. And imagine I told you there's a society out there with 330 million people, all of whom look differently than each other, with different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different understandings, heavily armed, trying to not kill each other. In the span of human history, thousands of years, the human condition is one where you choose conflict over conversation. You choose the spear over words. The idea that you utilize dialogue, let alone a complicated, sophisticated rule of law, to ensure that you realize the promise of e pluribus unum, out of many, one, is an awesome aberration. America is an awesome aberration.
The Village Square, a nervy bunch of liberals and conservatives who believe that disagreement and dialogue make for a good conversation, a good country, and a good time. At the Village Square, we talk about politics, religion, and race. You know, the topics your mom taught you never to discuss in polite company. Listen, at the Village Square, we make pigs fly.
Hey folks, welcome to Village Squarecast. This is Corey Nathan. So glad to be with you again. Thank you for joining us for America at 250, Her Ability to Repair Her Faults. Village Squarecast is funded in part by Florida Humanities with support from the Federation of State Humanities Councils and the Mellon Foundation. In this episode, we take up a big and urgent question. After nearly 2.5 centuries, does the American experiment still have the capacity to heal itself? Drawing on Alexis de Tocqueville's insight that America's greatness lies in her ability to repair her faults, this conversation explores the state of our civic life and the growing movement of people determined to strengthen it. Speaking of people determined to strengthen it, you'll hear reflections on why, as Liz put it, how much just showing up really does make a difference. You'll hear John Wood Jr. observe that good people will fail to see the good in one another, and why rebuilding trust between citizens is essential to making democracy work. And you'll hear Manu Meel describe America as an awesome aberration. I love that. A country where the human condition, capable of both love and hate, compromise and misunderstanding, still has real reason for hope. This program looks squarely at polarization while also highlighting practical examples from campuses and communities across the country where people are choosing conversation over contempt. With that, I'll turn it over to Liz Joyner, founder and president of the Village Square and my good pal, who introduces our program and this terrific panel featuring Manu Meel of Bridge USA and John Wood Jr. of Braver Angels.
Good evening. I'm Liz Joyner, founder and president of the Village Square. On behalf of the Village Square and Florida Humanities, we're delighted you've joined us tonight for America at 250, Her Ability to Repair Her Faults. This season of programs in response to the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. We are bringing amazing speakers to you. We just had a program with Dr. Lori Patton of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Next up is Dr. Ted Johnson, who's one of the most brilliant, wise people speaking on our topics that we know. I see tonight's guest as being very much in line with the tradition of those other guests, and I'm really excited for you to meet them if you don't know them already. I was honored to be with both of them recently at Mount Vernon, along with a number of extraordinary colleagues from over 500 organizations that compose the Listen First Coalition. that has been known to become the bridge building field over the last number of years. When we started 19 years ago, there was no such thing as a bridge building field, and it really has been one of the joys of my life to watch really the cavalry come in, regular citizens just rolling up their sleeves, changing their lives, changing their careers, changing their career plans in the event, in the case of one of our speakers tonight. And it's just it really says a lot about who we are as a people. I've taken to calling this movement Tocqueville 2.0. That's the title of our program tonight. It's from a Tocqueville quote as he witnessed what was so unique about Americans gathering together across this new country of ours, something he had never seen before. The full quote is, "The greatness of America lies not in being more enlightened than any other nation, but rather in her ability to repair her faults." Tonight, we'll ground this foundational idea from our past in both a present and a future as seen through the eyes of our guests. So, without further ado, our first guest has a serious fan base already with our UNUM audience, as he's joined us many times as facilitator before. Manu Meel is the founding CEO of Bridge USA. He's a social entrepreneur who's passionate about empowering young people. Protests on the campus of UCal Berkeley over a planned visit by right-wing provocateur Milo Yiannopoulos inspired then freshman Manu to establish what has now become Bridge USA, an organization that aims to promote democracy, not partisanship. And actually, I have the numbers, but I bet they've way blown past the numbers. As of this writing, they had 85 college campuses, chapters, and 35 high school chapters in 39 states. Manu was named to Forbes 30 Under 30 in education. This last summer, he received the George W. Bush Institute citation. He actually hasn't added that to his bio yet. From President Bush. He's appeared on MSNBC and Fox News. He's the host of a fabulous podcast, The Hopeful Majority, where he's interviewed many nationally prominent leaders. John Wood Jr. is the National Ambassador and Director of Public Engagement for Braver Angels, America's largest bipartisan grassroots organization dedicated to the work of political depolarization. Prior to that, Wood was a nominee for Congress in California's 43rd District in the 2014 election cycle. After that, he served as the second vice president of the Republican Party of Los Angeles County. He is an opinion columnist for USA Today, a field builder with New Pluralists, a collaborative of organizations dedicated to civic bridge building, and an advisor with the American Project, an initiative of the Pepperdine School of Public Policy dedicated to restoring the communitarian roots of conservatism. Manu and John.
Thanks for having us, Liz. Good to see you, John.
Good to see you too, Manu. And always good to see my friend Liz.
And, one of the things I didn't say about you all is that you are some of our dearest friends in this space. And I can't remember exactly how long I've known both of you, but for a very long time. And one of the things that other people may not know is there is an extraordinary field of people who work all the time at this task. We've got our shoulder to the wheel. We're always talking to each other. And it's been really one of the joys of my life to see you guys accomplish so much in it.
Well, we've sort of grown up in this work, I would say, under your wing, really, Liz. I mean, you were bringing together the coalition around this sort of work well before a number of us even knew that this was a thing to do.
I will take full credit for all of your accomplishments.
have to honor you and be honest about that.
Thank you. That's really great.
Yeah, I think Liz, you said, to John's point, you said you started this work 19 years ago, and I think I was 7 years old then. So
I wasn't trying to make her.
By the way, that's not exaggeration.
I wasn't trying to make her feel bad.
No, I'm not.
You're trying to make me feel old.
No, you can literally take credit for all the accomplishments. Yeah.
No, I really do. I think of y'all as I think that I'm a little too young to be John's mom, but I am exactly the right age to be Manu's. So I really do. I think that people have not met you before will see why I feel so strongly about just how wonderful you are as we have the conversation tonight. So, I want to start with just something about both of you that has nothing to do with this work. Just tell our folks who you are.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm happy to jump on that first. I mean, people who know me well enough may know this, but I come from a musical family, principally speaking. So I was raised a singer and a jazz musician. I even rap a little bit. My siblings are all musicians. My cousins, who are my father's a jazz pianist. My mother danced on Soul Train back in the late '70s, early '80s or so. She's an R&B singer. Grandpa owned the biggest record label in America in the late '50s, mid to late '50s. That was Dot Records, which was Pat Boone's record label. And I had an uncle who was a part of a group called the West Side Connection, which was Ice Cube's group after he left NWA, for any hip hop heads who might be might be in the audience. So, but I'm a big jazz guy, and grew up playing the horn, and been known to sing a note or two also if given the right opportunity. So.
And do you still sing?
Yeah, when I've got my voice, the problem is, giving speeches and going to all these conferences, I'm always losing my voice. But when I have it, you know,
Well, maybe you can plan
yeah.
to wrap us out at the end. What do you think?
Well, only if you start beatboxing, Liz. That's how that's gotta work.
Oh, that'd be scary. Nobody wants to see that. Nobody.
Right.
Manu.
Well, I will say John is a great singer. I've had the privilege of hearing him sing on a couple of different occasions, and I've also heard him play the trumpet, I think, on 4 different occasions. And
Really?
yes, I have, and twice at his house, and
Mm.
twice on stage. And so I have I will say that John speaks modestly about his musical talents, and they are far better than mine. And nobody wants to hear me sing. Um, Liz, you mentioned a career change. So I actually started off college as a pre-med student. I came to UC Berkeley in 2017. I grew up across the East Coast. I was born in New Jersey. I then lived for the first 5 years of my life in India with my grandparents while my parents were out in the US. Then I came back, moved all over the place. And when I was shipped off to UC Berkeley, what was really interesting was that I showed up to campus with some interest in politics, but not like really some raging desire for progress or building an organization. And so for me, what's fascinating, to like my parents' deep chagrin, as I'm not a doctor, is that, you know, it's a testament, I think, to the fact that everyday people over the last 7, 8 years, as you said, that aren't necessarily tacticians or builders, are getting involved in different ways and thinking about how to reduce polarization in our country. And, if like a random pre-med nerdy Indian guy with Indian roots can build, the largest and fastest growing student-led organization in the country with some of his best friends. We're now at 120 college chapters. We engage 42,000 students a year. The fact is that anyone can do that. It's really a question of finding community and purpose, and I'm grateful to have found that. So I think both John's and I's stories, and a lot of the other guests, you said Jeff has come in at the end, Jane Kaminsky, you mentioned Yuval. All these folks are folks that have gotten involved in very different and interesting ways, and I think people should take a lesson from that our problems are not insurmountable, but very much as you said, to Tocqueville's point, a commune of people in the country that are always thinking about how to improve our faults.
So I remember I met you. I want to say you were either a sophomore or a junior at UCal Berkeley.
Yeah, it was my sophomore year. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. And actually, we're trying to figure out where you met each other. And John, and his other half, came to Berkeley as part of our speaker pair series, but you weren't there. So you have something to make up for.
But I saw the flyer.
People
I
are gonna
saw the
think
flyer.
people are gonna think you're talking about my wife. You're talking about Karen O'Connor,
Oh yeah, sorry,
who
sorry.
kind of a work spouse at the time, I guess.
Yeah. So we
But,
we
yeah.
have the Village Square has a speaker pair series called Respect and Rebellion,
Mhm.
and John and his ideological opposite with Braver Angels, Karen O'Connor, are one of our speaker pairs, and they went to Berkeley, where
Yeah.
Manu was building that. It would at that point in time it was Bridge Berkeley, and now he and Ross and many of their friends at the time have undertaken this incredible thing. Um, Now, you guys, you work together some. What kind of work do you do together?
Yeah. Well, Bridge USA and Braver Angels, along with the American Council for Trustees and Alumni, have an extraordinary campus-based partnership, whereby Braver Angels, particularly Braver Angels Debates Program, which is sort of a community debate format, it's unfolds according to a parliamentary model. So you have a chairperson in the middle of the floor sort of facilitating the dialogue. But it brings people together from all walks of life, all levels of society. If you're in the room, whether you're a professor or a janitor or a cameraman, you have the opportunity to speak. And my former colleague April Lawson used to describe it by saying that it was a model for debate in which people pursue truth through the spirit of community, right? Rather than seeking to sort of own or obliterate the person on the other side of the question. So there's a resolution that's given that's supposed to split the room. Resolved, we should oppose the occupation in Gaza, or resolved, peanut butter is better without jelly. And from there,
No
people
way.
have yeah, right. And then from there, people, engage in the debate in a way that gives each participant the opportunity to give a short speech, not just speaking from the vantage point of their ideological opinion, but also from the vantage point of their own personal experience, the reasons why they think the way they do, and also with an encouragement towards being honest about the doubts that you might have about a given subject. So there's great emphasis on intellectual humility, but through Bridge USA, we have been tapped into a student community that's really been able to amplify that norm and that way of sort of relating to debate on campuses. But probably be appropriate to let Manu say more, since he's got a
Students
front
dig
row
the
seat to this.
Yeah, students dig the debates, Manu.
Mm,
Yeah, the college debates and discourse alliance that John is referring to is I think one of many interesting initiatives that students are really starting to embrace. So students love the debate, students love a lot of dialogues, but I think the one piece I want to add to this, Liz, is that especially in the last 2 years, but especially in the since the tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk on September 10th, there's been a genuine and growing appetite, I think at every demographic level, but particularly I see it with young people because that's who I work with on a daily basis on college campuses, that are counterculturally responding to the moment that we live in and are just embracing conversation. And I see it day in and day out. And I think the great turn that this movement is now taking is that the hope and progress is very tangible. And I think the American people don't necessarily want platitudes about, how we can, get past our difference and all this stuff. I think they want to see hard facts. And so one of the things that I'm excited to bring to this conversation as we continue is, in addition to Brave Angels and Bridge, but just broadly what we've been seeing in terms of success. And I think that success is going to give people that are listening to this across all the platforms that you've assembled an opportunity to understand that the gap in the media versus the reality on the ground
mm,
is substantial. And in some ways, we are both representing an underdog force,
mhm,
but we are also representing something that I think people are now just engaging at scale. And I'm
mm,
really excited about that.
right.
Yeah, that's great. So one other background story about each of you. I'm interested in how you found yourself in the middle of this national food fight. Like, what got you here?
Mm,
Sure. So, for me, as I said, starting off as a pre-med student, I distinctly remember on February 2nd, 2017, which is the day that changed the trajectory of my life. And I'm not sure when John and you all came to campus. It probably was a few months after that.
Yeah, I
But
think it may have even been the next year.
yeah, I think it may have been the next year, actually. So Feb 2nd, 2017, we had a speaker by the name of Milo Yiannopoulos come to campus. And there were these significant protests at Berkeley about his speaking, which wasn't really that different. I mean, Berkeley's been the center of social progress and innovation and pushbacks and all that stuff. So that's all par for the course. But what was different was I was walking past a cafe, and the window of this cafe was broken in, Liz, and inside there's a TV screen, and it said CNN, UC Berkeley students protest free speech. Now, I didn't know what any of that meant, but the television crew that was recording that, it's a woman named Kyung-la, who's now very high up in a lot of the CNN reporting, they were standing right next to me. And that was the breaking of the fourth wall. That was where we went from feeling like spectators of American democracy to participants. And the next day, me and some random people, folks like Ross, got together. And our response was that after the largest protest in Berkeley's history since the 60s, since Dr. King came to campus, we're going to get the protested and the protesters to have a dialogue. Which, if you're sitting in the audience, you should say that's a very naive concept. Don't
mhm,
do that, Manu. Don't even touch that ball of wax. And that's the great thing about being a doctor, because
mhm,
I wasn't a doctor then, but I was studying to be one. which means that the intellectual rigor that someone like John would have had and applied in that situation didn't apply to me. And
Mhm.
so we walked into this conversation, right? And the first conversation we call, as you said, we called it Bridge Berkeley, and the logo was the Golden Gate Bridge. And 75 people showed up to that conversation, which for us at that time was a big deal. 30 of them left in the first 2 minutes because they thought it was a civic architecture frat. Um, wha so why do I tell you that? So we listened to the conversation a second time, 2 weeks, and that conversation fundamentally changed everything for me because people showed up in that room on ice, ready to fight. And my friend Ross had this idea, which was instead of talking about our policies, let's talk about vulnerability. Let's talk about each other's families, each other's backgrounds, what brings us here, why are you protesting? And suddenly you got to the level of understanding that you normally can't get to. I share all of that because one thing that I want to reiterate today, and I've been doing this across the board, is anyone that is listening to our story, know that you can get involved in the fight too. It really does not take a rocket scientist to understand that you don't have a democracy if you can't talk to each other. And the value in this moment is great leaders like John, who laid the intellectual architecture for this work. People like Monica Guzman, others, David McCullough on the high school side. There's a whole cadre of people that have laid the foundation for you to act and get involved. And I think that's really powerful at this moment. So that's how I got involved in this stuff.
Yeah, it's weird. I do wish that people understood better that how much just showing up makes a really big difference. Like we've got data behind it. Being
Absolutely.
in a space with people who are dissimilar to you really does change things and pretty easily. And plus, it just makes I don't know. I think if I weren't doing this work, I would have lots of ulcers. I'd be throwing things at the TV set. So it makes you see this other side of things that you don't see otherwise.
Right. Yeah.
So John, you.
I'm just laughing at the idea of, like, Manu receiving his, commendation from George W. Bush and sending the picture of the certificate to his mother, and his mother just shaking her head. It's just, it could have
It's
been
funny
so
because
much
And in
so
the
many
spirit of
years.
bipartisanship, we got one for President Obama too.
Yeah,
Well,
And
right.
now it's
yay!
like, you know,
Just she was just, could have
Yeah,
been a
it's funny.
doctor,
It's
so
funny because years ago, I saw Manu at a Heterodox Academy conference, and you were struggling at the time, right, with
right?
which direction,
Yeah,
and of course, I
I'm still
encouraged
struggling.
you to come our
Mhm,
direction, and so glad I did. But I
mm.
did not know that I would be in trouble with your mother, so I would like to officially apologize, Manu's mom.
This was the
So sorry.
intervention we're all looking for. Sorry,
Yeah,
go ahead, John.
he
Tell us
doesn't.
about your real story. Bring us back home.
Yeah, yeah, you're right, right. Well, my story, I tell my story a lot, and yet it's never particularly easy for me to encapsulate. I mean, I tell people that I never really had a seminal moment in which I became persuaded of the need for bridging because I think my trajectory towards it comes um, along the track of just having a certain identity experience in the American story. So, but I'll share the line that folks who follow me enough will have heard me say it before. But of course, as you alluded to, Liz, once upon a time I was a nominee for Congress. Feels like another life at this point. But back in 2014, I was the youngest active nominee for Congress in the state of California, and I was running really as a hope and change Republican. And there's a story behind that. But people would ask me, they'd say, and whether I was speaking to a black Democratic leading church in South Central Los Angeles, or a white Tea Party club in South Bay LA County, people would say, "Well, what at the age of 26 years old makes you qualified to represent our district?" And I'd say, "Well, I come from an interesting family background. My mother's a liberal black Democrat from inner city LA. My father's a conservative white Republican from Tennessee. I grew up explaining my father to my mother and my mother to my father, and that's why I can represent all of you." So that was my canned opening line. Um, and the truth is that my parents did come from decidedly different universes culturally, socioeconomically. Politics wasn't really the issue between them. And actually, my dad were here, he'd be very quick to point out the fact that he didn't actually grow up a Republican. He became a Republican, I think, after Obama was elected. So he was one of those people who felt that the Democratic Party had left him behind. And yet, he was somebody who raised us with a great deal of emphasis on the idea of traditional American values. There was a definite sort of Southern inflection to my upbringing. And My mother and him, 13 years apart. My father grew up in a very wealthy home. My mother grew up much more modestly. They really were just black and white, metaphorically speaking, in the way they saw things. And so it really it occurred to me early on that when people's life experiences are different enough, good people will fail to see the good in one another. And I receive very different sort of narratives in terms of outlooks on life in America and life in general. And as I got older, people had a tendency to want to label me this way or that way. And as a mixed kid, you sort of find yourself feeling some pressure to identify in one way or the other. I remember a little indicative story. I remember I was probably only about 5 years old or so, and I was with my dad. We were in the kitchen. He was making a sandwich or something, and I had noticed that most families tended to be the same color. Everybody in the family tended to be about the same color. But in our house, when my parents were still married, there were 3 colors. That my mother, who's, more on the, mahogany side, my dad, who's, sort of, on the beige, peach end of things, and then there was me in between. And so I asked Dad, I said, "Dad," "You're white, right?" And he's like, kinda looked at me funny. He was like, "Yes." I was like, "Mom, she's black, right?" And he said, "Yeah, she is." I said, "So what am I?" And he said, "Oh, well, son, can't you tell?" And he sort of knelt down and he picked up my hand and he turned my hand to me so that I could look at the back of my hand. And he said, "You're tan." I was like, "I'm tan?" He's like, "You're tan." And so my self-professed racial identification for the next 2 years of my life was tan, before I knew that that wasn't actually a category on the census or whatnot, right? So, there was a little bit of a kind of a colorblind ethos that I had at home, but, I mean, but I'd run into black kids and say, like, "You're black and you gotta be black." And, but then, I remember having an interaction, wasn't planning on talking about this, but I remember having an interaction in high school in a moment where I was going through sort of, I was, in Thomas Chatterton Williams' words, I was losing my cool a little bit. So I was deeply identifying my blackness with sort of hip hop culture and so on and so forth. And this one kid who also happened to be mixed, and he was way more popular than I was. I remember I was sort of trying to show off my lingo in front of him, and he kind of nodded. And at some point, I started talking about how proud I was to be black. And he said to me, he said something along the lines of, he said, "Well," he said, "I'm proud to be black too." He said, "But I'm also proud to be white." Because I'm just as much one as I am the other. And he said, "And so are you." And I remember having this sense of guilt at that, because I thought, geez, am I sort of discounting my father's side of the family in order to embrace my mother's side of the family? And so from then on, I tried to take a more integrated approach to sort of defining myself on an ethnic level, sort of culturally and so forth in America. It always became very important to me to honor the different heritage, the different streams of legacy and experience in my own family tree, but that wound up sort of mapping out to the way I looked at sort of race in America. So fast forward to the Obama campaign. I worked for the Obama campaign because it seemed to be an effort to kind of reconcile America across these identity dimensions. I wound up studying conservatism in the aftermath of the Obama campaign in an effort to bring conservatives into the Obama coalition. Wound up sort of persuading myself of the value of conservatism. Many things were happening in my life at the time. I got married. I had sort of religious conversion. I adopted Christianity. She joined the military. We moved to a military town. All these things sort of pushed me to the right. But I still believed in this vision of an America that transcended its ideological, its partisan, and its cultural and racial sort of divisions. And so I tried to bring that way of doing things to the Republican Party. Second vice chairman of the Republican Party of Los Angeles County after my race for Congress. I ran against Maxine Waters in that election cycle, by the way, and I actually did really well. She's been in Congress for 60 years. I did better than any Democrat or Republican who's ever run against her. I tell people I lost in the smallest landslide of anybody who ever
That's
took on
something.
that. Yeah, anybody who ever took on that challenge. But I was confronted with the reality early on that the institutional parties, believe it or not, are not very fertile soil for a sort of transcendent approach to politics. They weren't really thinking about King's beloved community within the institutional GOP, and I think it would have been the same thing in the
Yeah.
Democratic
Boy,
Party.
that's an understatement of the century. We all know that now.
Yeah. So eventually, a mutual friend of mine, Luke Phillips, who was working with
Mhm.
No Labels as a volunteer, this is way back in 2015.
He's another one of our speaker pairs.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
There
he
you
does it
go.
with his cousin.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, Luke is an incredible writer, editor, public intellectual, and somebody who was a colleague at Brave Angels. But early on, he pointed out to me the existence of an organization then called Better Angels, which was having these community level gatherings based on marriage counseling and family therapy. But I was trying to build out in the digital realm, sort of podcast and sort of an approach to creating an online culture in which people could connect across party divides. I brought that way of thinking to Better Angels way back in 2017 or so, but because of the rest of my skills and my story and so forth, very just quickly became an ambassador and general strategist for the organization. And the rest, as they say, is history. So
It's history.
that's my story in a walloping nutshell.
In one of your very beautiful USA Today pieces, you wrote, "There is still no path towards America," or excuse me, "There is still no path towards the America most of us want to see," and boy, we really do,
Mm,
"without working hard day by day to restore trust among the American people."
mm,
Uh, say more about why you think that, Manu. What do you think? Are there other ways
mm.
other than us doing the work?
Well, yeah, I'll just say quickly, and then I'll turn it over to Manu. But I think that part of what we are afflicted by um, in the modern age, really, is a sense that um, high IQ style smarts and intelligence, and sort of building on from that, a sophisticated approach to policy and the development of systems is sufficient to being able to create a society that functions well, right? We need the smart people in charge. We need the people who have the right sort of agenda and program in a position of power to be able to make decisions. And without undercutting the basic validity of that way of thinking, what we have forgotten are the fundamental things that we presumably learned in kindergarten. The idea that ultimately society and the functionality of society rests upon a fabric of relationships that exist between groups and individuals, right? And so in the past, we have not paid much attention to the health of relationships in democratic society. Most people have tended to think in terms about how things are structured, whether or not things need to be reformed or even revolutionized, and so forth. But when you get to the level of evaluating the relationships that exist between people, that puts us in a conversation where we have to reflect upon our own attitudes, our own dispositions, our own sense of virtue, compassion, generosity, curiosity, and our own ability and willingness to empathize with and understand one another so as to be able to situate ourselves in community with each other. And in that context, where we have relationships with each other that are healthy, trust can flourish. Or put the other way, it is only when trust flourishes that we can have relationships that are healthy with each other. And when we are situated in those sorts of relationships, it meaningfully affects our relationship and our attitude towards the operating of our institutions and the rule of law, right? Because if we do not trust one another, if I do not trust you, Liz, then if I have power in a given institution, well, I'm much more likely to weaponize that power against you. If you have power in a given institution, and if you are standing behind the enforcement of a given law or statute, and I don't trust you, I am much more likely to interpret any of your actions as being meant maliciously towards me and therefore render them invalid, right? I'm much more likely to believe that you cheated to win a given election. I am much more likely to consider the outcome of a given democratic contest as illegitimate. And what happens in that context is that everything becomes destabilized. institutions cannot serve their function. And we embark on a race to the bottom in terms of the functionality of our institutions because it is being pulled by the dragnet of this downward spiral of our social fabric. So that's the relationship that exists between trust and democracy, in my view.
Yeah, so that reminds me of I've been dweebing out on American Revolution, the Ken Burns PBS film,
Mm.
and I wrote down an Edmund Burke quote that reminds me of what you just said.
Mm.
Americans have made a discovery, or think they have made one, that we mean to oppress them. We have made a discovery, or think we have made one, that they intend to rise in rebellion. Our severity has increased their ill behavior. We know not how to advance. They know not how to retreat. Some party must give way.
Mm.
Kind of reminds me of the moment we're in a lot of ways,
Yeah, right.
which is not good.
Yeah.
Since that was pre-revolution. Manu.
I think John did a really good job providing, I think, a social and political understanding of the way that the institutions in our civic fabrics have resulted in sort of a cycle to the end. Uh, but I think about this in a lot more simpler terms. So I would say in the last 7 years, building Bridge USA, as we've gone to different college chapters, visited almost every single state in the country, started Bridge Europe, Bridge Africa, Bridge Hong Kong, had chapter
No, I did not know that.
Bridge Moscow, Bridge Sudan. Um, the one thing that has become clear is that the human condition is universal. And the human condition is one that is capable of love, and is capable of hate. It's capable of anger. It's capable of compromise. It's capable of understanding, and it's capable of misunderstanding. And imagine I told you there's a society out there with 330 million people, all of whom look differently than each other, with different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different understandings, heavily armed,
Mhm.
trying to not kill each other. In the span of human history, thousands of years, the human condition is one where you choose conflict over conversation, you choose the spear over words, the idea that you utilize dialogue, let alone a complicated, sophisticated rule of law, to ensure that you realize the promise of e pluribus unum, out of many, one, is an awesome aberration. America is an awesome aberration. Everything we see today does not surprise me. None of it. And that's why I retain so much optimism and hope, is because we're playing with house money. We're playing with house money. Thomas Paine called America humanity's last best hope. Why was that? It's because this is the most ambitious experiment in the history of humanity, because it's not supposed to work. And when you think about it in that way, when you're a young person and you're inheriting this experiment, to think about what happens next, you are actually pioneering something fundamentally not only countercultural, but in some ways counter to some of the worst impulses of humanity. I say all of that because the challenges of the United States, and you layer things like social media on top of that, artificial intelligence, a complex arms race with a country like China, the work of polarization in some ways is not only foundational to this country, but the work of depolarizing this union is something that is necessary, needed across industries. But I think it's really important for people to understand that next year, 250, and this is the last thing I'll say, we're going to turn 250 years young. To a young person like me, that might sound like a really long time. In the context of human history, the Roman Empire lasted for 1,800 years, Athenian democracy for 400 years, the Chinese dynasties for 1,500 years. So the American experiment is not at the end of its story, it's just the beginning. And if you understand that it's just the beginning and it's an awesome aberration, we've got nothing to lose, because the status quo is the worst case option. And the people in this room and the people listening are building something of fundamental optimism, which I'm really excited to support.
And you feel like you're starting to see that where you do work. The
I will give you
excitement.
tangible evidence, because that's what I care about. Our team right now, we're in some San Francisco startup place where all they care about is numbers and metrics. And I'm not a big numbers and metrics enthusiast, but I think the American people want hard facts. I think they're tired of the platitudes of the bridging movement. I think people want hard facts. So I'm going to give you 3 very hard facts. The first is when Charlie Kirk, who is someone that I knew relatively decently, someone that while I disagreed on form and style, respected deeply for what he was trying to do from his standpoint. And as Dave Chappelle says, it takes one to know one. And so I understood what he was trying to do. I may have disagreed with that endpoint, but I understood. So after he was tragically assassinated, in 48 hours, Liz, we had 17 chapters host 22 discussions. Our San Jose State chapter that night, 8 hours later, hosted one of their largest conversations where 27 additional conservative students showed up, students that would have never showed up otherwise. Why did we see that? It's because people are hungry, as our student said, because their lives depending on dialogue. Second hard fact, social media, because I know a lot of people in the audience are like, man, what about these algorithms? September 13th onwards, the Bridge USA Instagram account grew at 100 followers an hour for 32 days straight. We added 62,000 followers in 32 days with zero ad spend, purely organic content highlighting our students and demonstrating what is possible in terms of optimism. It's because people are exhausted and they're looking for something effective. And last third hard fact is that in the 2024 election, leading up to that moment, all Bridge USA chapters in total over 3 years had engaged 8,000 students, 8,200 to be precise. From September to December of 2024, what is supposedly the most divisive time in human history, apparently, that's what the pundits want you to believe, we engaged 10,000 students. We engaged more students in 3 months than we did for the first 3 years of Bridge USA combined. And then you wonder, oh my God, that's an election bump. Next semester, spring, we engaged 10,300 students. In total, in 2024 to 2025 academic year, we engaged 21,000 total students, which is a drop in the bucket, by the way. But when you start asking about evidence, it's there.
Wow,
So
that's
all I got to present. That's the case I got. I don't know. I see a lot of credibility in that case. Now, you might stack the numbers against me, but the question is, a lot of those numbers are natural and inevitable because of the moment we live in. What you're asking about is there hope? And the people in the audience need to understand there is a ton of hope, and it's backed by hard facts.
I think that if you look at the trends that you're identifying, what they're evidence of, in my view, even when you get beyond the sort of relatively closed context of campus communities, is the fact that there is a hunger within the body politic that shows up in the growth of your social media followings, the increase in the percentage of people who are participating in these programs, in the sort of bumps that we see in Brave Rangers member roles. And I think that the challenge, in part, has been the fact that we've been trying to catch rain with leaky buckets, with buckets full of holes, right? For much of the sort of course of time in which the bridging movement has been developing and building. A lot of good work happening in disparate fashion without a sort of fully forged narrative and without a more comprehensive structure that can provide a center of gravity and a direction of cultural leadership, whereby those cultural forces in American society that want something different, that want to aspire towards a vision of America that is more deeply unified and that is capable of pushing back against the narratives that toxicify us on each side. That has to have something to go. That energy has to have has to have a place to pull. Bridge USA, I think, is a visible place in which those energies can come together and express themselves in a community that is empowering and productive, right? But our movement has to be able to generate that sort of a center of gravity with clear places to plug in and a clear story that you can track in a way that serves as a lightning rod for a movement that exists at scale in the nation. And so, I mean, that is the shape of the project as I see it, on something more of a technical level. if you will. And there are all sorts of layers to that. But the but just to go back to Manu's point, I mean, the basic basis for hope lies in the fact that the worse this problem becomes, the more you can see and feel the sentiment of the American people wanting to push in a different direction, right? But that alternative needs to be made available to them. The pathways for engagement need to be clear, and we need to clarify them.
And Liz, if I could just add one thing to John, because I think he's right, and John and I talk about this all the time, and others do as well. Uh, the growth that Bridge USA is seeing is not just to Bridge USA. It's to organizations across the space in higher ed and faith and Braver Angels, you name it. So the counterculture is taking hold across society. But here's the second thing. What John is saying about how do you create tactical relevance and you give people an outlet and energy, um, this is something that's been replicated many times over. The conservative movement did this really well, 2012 onwards. The arisal and creation of institutions like Turning Point USA, the Daily Wire, which was a media platform that took all of these voices and pushed them into one consolidated element. The progressives did this with President Obama in 2008. Ronald Reagan did this with the concept of a shining city on the hill. Richard Nixon did this with the silent majority. FDR did this. You have examples of this in the private sector when it comes to norms shift. So, um, when you think about a movement that has an air game, which is the social media and the social permission structure, which I think people like John play really well in. You have the ground game, where you have organizations building hardcore infrastructure like Village Square in Tallahassee, and you have a community identity, a narrative that John is talking about. That is how you build something tactical. And part of what I'm trying to do in my public appearances in the last 6 months and going forward is I want to wrap narrative storytelling into hardcore tactics so that when the people that are listening to this, they're like, oh my God, they have their shit together.
Mm.
And when you feel that, you realize that when you're trying to fight a political battle, which this is in some ways, you can shift and transform the opportunity of the moment. So that's why I wanted to get really tactical.
So, one of the along those lines, an example that I really love is Robert Putnam and Shailene Romney Garrett write about the progressive area. So after World War I, things felt really bleak and society was sort of frayed. And they describe it as like a flock of birds. You couldn't exactly see what bird moved first, but
Mhm.
that all of a sudden there was this movement everywhere. That and the murmurations of the birds are what they saw in data at that particular time, and so what you all are describing, what we need, it feels like that kind of moment where leaders like you lead the way, and then everyone is moving.
Yeah. You know, Manu, of course, gave us a number of examples. Of course, Manu, the examples that you gave, I think, are informative, um, but tend to be associated with one side or the other of the political aisle. Presidents, you name Roosevelt and Reagan and Obama and so on and so forth. So, I mean, our task is, you know, for most of my time at Braver Angels, we have framed this project in terms of really sort of community building and movement building in a way that could accomplish sort of equal buy-in from mainstream left and mainstream right behind a revival or transformation of the norms of democracy, right? But not necessarily rallying people around a particular policy outcome, even if convening people around policy was a part of the process of reinvigorating the norms of democracy. And you know uh, that uh, that approach, that may still be fundamentally the approach, but we're at a moment in time, I think, where it's worth reflecting on some of the challenges of that, because the social movements, political movements can be diverse in their constituencies. There's usually a core. Manu, feel free to. I'd be curious to know if you agree with this assessment. I feel like with social movements, there is usually a core constituency that has a general sort of cultural and identity-based sort of mainstream that rallies around a tangible vision of what are the policy outcomes? How is it? What's the sort of sort of tangible ways in which something is going to change in the law or in politics, right? So there's a straight line to draw between sort of saying we are the party of the people and we want labor protections and a stronger social safety net, or we are the party of conservatives and small business owners and we want deregulation and a road back to traditional values in America. But the movement we've been trying to envision, because we are me, you, Liz, the people listening here, because we, I think, generally want to aspire towards a democracy that is meaningfully inclusive of all of its different pieces, right? We want to imagine a movement that can speak to something that everybody wants. But then in terms of marketing that movement out, it has prevented us, I think, from being able to think in terms of what is the particular identity of this movement and the people who are powering it, because we were trying to talk about this in ways that make space for every possible identity. And in a Brave Angels context, that has gotten difficult right down to the level of like, well, do we use the word republic or do we use the word democracy, right? Because for a lot of conservatives, this is not a democracy, and a lot of liberals don't have any relationship to the word republic. It goes right down to the level of, well, wait, is it appropriate to invoke God in the way we talk about this work, or is that going to be offensive to liberal secular sensibilities, right? And so I still feel like we are evolving in our conception of this movement, but we have to come to a place to where the cultural vision, I think, is cohesive enough to be able to bring five open fingers into something like a fist. I'm a nonviolent guy, but just for the purposes of metaphor, you see. So, I mean, Manu, I'd love to see if you sort of grab the shape of the tension I'm illustrating, and two, sort of how you deal with that in terms of defining the shape of the movement we're building in the kind of this unique context here.
Well, Liz, I love the direction this conversation is going. Do you want me to continue down this direction, or do you want to take it a
Yeah.
different way?
Go for it.
So,
I'm always trying to hit Manu with things that are coming from
no,
different angles.
so I think about this. Well, let me just say, I spend 90% of my time thinking about why this work won't succeed, because I've been called a fascist more times than I can count. And as someone that looks like the spitting image of one, I've run out of fingers of and so it requires a lot of introspection, right?
Mm-hmm.
And uh, what I will say is I think about our Bridge USA Summit all the time. John, actually, if you remember, you interviewed me for your podcast in 2022, I think, which is 3 or 4 years ago, where I really introduced this concept that there's a new divide. So what do I mean by this? The reason why I reference all of these presidential movements was that what they understood was that democracy is both a game of addition and it's a game of coalitions. And you can't win in American politics without defining an us and a them.
Right.
Which, by the way, is very dicey territory for the bridging field. But if you're curious as to why we attracted 100 followers an hour for 32 days straight, it's because we actually do believe there's a they. And we're not nervous about calling it out. And the reason for that is you will always lose people. But the one thing that I've found doing this work is if you're building a movement that's trying to capture everybody, you're not going to capture anybody. So when I think about our Bridge USA Summit, we've got gay kids, we got black kids, we got Indian kids, we got tech kids, we got applied mathematicians, we've got students that are on the far left of this political spectrum, we got Bridge USA students that are on the far right of the political spectrum, all your different constituencies. So why are all these kids spending so much time? Because young people are motivated oftentimes by being a part of something that they think is going to do something, right? Why aren't they part of the Turning Point chapter? Why aren't they part of the Democratic Socialists? Why aren't they, following Ben Shapiro and said, here's the secret. They actually are doing all those things. But they're deeply united around the how of creating change. And here's what they're united around. They believe that the way you create change in this country is through being curious, through being open-minded, through building coalitions, through listening. They believe that they'll be better human beings for those conversations. So they deeply disagree on the what, but they agree on the how. And I think the next generational political project is actually litigating and legislating this new divide between open-minded and closed-minded.
Mm.
Now, you might ask, well, what's the policy goal, endpoint of being open-minded? Democracy. And your community
Knowledge, right? I mean,
knowledge.
solving problems. That's
People are
how
like,
you do
but
it.
that's not. But people say, oh well, that's not kitchen table issues. Because Zohran Mamdani won in New York City. I was on live on MSNBC the next day where they tried to ambush me to make me like a Zohran supporter, and they said, well, okay, you talk about all this stuff, but it's not as tangible as affordability. And I said, let me ask you something. Do you think anyone actually believes that Zoran's going to achieve his agenda?
Mm.
I've yet to meet someone that said, oh, he's actually going to get his free buses passed.
Mm.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, of all people, is now a bridge builder. Have you been watching her interviews?
Who
Yeah.
knew?
So
Yeah.
what's my point
It's
in all
been
this?
interesting.
So we are solving the preconditioned problems to actually enable our leaders to solve your kitchen table issues.
Right.
So last thing I'll say is the they. Who is the they? Who are we fighting? We are fighting the outrage industrial complex. We're fighting everybody that believes that the way you create change in democracy is through outrage. We're fighting everybody that believes that they are worse off listening to someone. And there are a lot of people like that.
Mhm.
And I'm okay with losing people. Because if I'm trying to build something that tries to get everybody, I'm going to be left with zero.
Yeah, right. Yeah, see, this is, I think we've reached a point here to where, and I hear it more and more in Manu's voice, as time goes on, and perhaps in my own, but I think that we've reached a point where if we're going to step out onto the battlefield, so to speak, of American democratic politics, um, we have to be willing to draw lines in a way that accepts the fact that people are going to be dissatisfied with the positions that we take, um, and that yet make it possible for us to sort of provoke an entry into the conversation such that we can actually be relevant to the things that Americans are talking about and thinking about. I think to pull one little piece from what Manu just said, we have to be able to show the direct connection between revitalizing the norms of democracy and being able to not just solve problems in the abstract, but to make an impact on immigration reform, to make an impact on climate, to make a direct impact on campus safety and so forth. And those lines of connection are there to be drawn on every single issue because there's really no issue, the national debt, there's no issue you can point to that hasn't been undermined by the fact that the dysfunctional relationship between the American people has incentivized a dysfunctional relationship between our elected leaders and a distortion of the way our institutions are supposed to operate, such that no major problem can be solved. But what that means is that we have to draw a contrast in terms of the way we need to be doing business as an American people and the way business is currently being done. The difficulty, though, lies in the fact that we don't want to contribute to the problem that we're here to solve, this fundamental problem of the judgmentalism, the tribalism.
Wait, John, can I
The
actually ask you a question on that?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Has America actually ever been void of judgmentalism and tribalism? And do you actually think the end point should be to get American society rid of that?
I don't think it's a question of being of void. I think it's a question of trajectory. You know, I don't think that you're ever going to have a democratic society absent conflict, in absent contempt, even. And of course, George Washington, on the one hand, in his farewell address, warned us against tribalism and polarization. On the other hand, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr were as wickedly offensive towards each other as you could possibly imagine. Well, of course, Aaron Burr shot and killed Alexander Hamilton. He had duels back in those days. So, and yet, I do believe that if you take the Civil War and contrast it with the Civil Rights Movement 100 years later, what you had with respect to the Civil War was not just a disagreement between geographical factions over a policy issue like slavery, but you had a policy issue like slavery, which was as deeply moral in its connotations as it could be. But you had that issue express itself in the context of deep-seated and long building sectional, cultural, even religious and philosophical disagreements that became deep-seated identity-based contempt between Northerners and Southerners. It wasn't just that you were born on different sides of the line. It was what being born or living on different sides of that line represented in terms of who we were to each other in the context of the relationship that existed between Americans at that time. In the 1960s, 100 years later, I mean, there was, the political violence was severe in that time too. But, as Manu and Liz know about me, I mean, I draw a great deal of inspiration from Dr. King and the nonviolent movement. And part of what happened in that context is that you did have a movement that was very aggressive in terms of pressing for both a legislative outcome and a cultural outcome. But it did so in a way to where it was simultaneously trying to minister to the relationship of trust and goodwill that existed between people across this political division and across this cultural division, right? So, it's not about finding an end-all be-all solution to contempt, but I do think it is about engendering momentum towards the basic fundamentals of trust and community building, while making the case that doing so is inextricable from our ability to actually solve the concrete, tangible problems that face American politics. So operating on both of those fronts simultaneously seems to be the challenge and the opportunity.
I actually agree with you 100%. And the one quick thing I'll just add for 15 seconds is your point about building trust and creating relationships. That's actually the divide that I'm talking about.
Right.
Because there are 20% of the American people that don't believe in that, and 80% do. And
Mhm.
so when I say there's an us versus them, my curiosity is how do you actually make the debate about that?
Yeah,
'Cause
exactly, right.
you get what I'm saying? So
Yeah,
that's why
yeah, no, so let me just jump right on that. So, because we've been doing this long enough to where I think we have to be willing to sort of take it. What one of the most obvious questions we've always been asked is, what is Brave Angel's position on Donald Trump, right? What is our position on Trump? And on the one hand, it's a very obvious and natural question to ask because Donald Trump's style of politics is such that I don't think even most Donald Trump supporters would say that he has not weaponized, polarization and personality-based ad hominem politics in a way that allows him to build his brand and to build his political momentum. But of course, we want to build a movement in which Trump supporters are as welcome as anybody else. And so that has always put us in sort of the awkward position of saying, like, let us call out certain types of behavior in principle in the abstract, but not sort of identify it too closely with the sins of any one politician or another, especially if they command loyalty among the people who we want to bring into community with each other. Now, I am bringing that up here in this moment because I think that we have to find a way to be able to, I think, in drawing this line that you want us to draw, Manu, and I agree that we need to draw, also sort of reckon with the tension of the fact that that sort of requires us being able to some degree, name names, I think. Or does it? Maybe I'm wrong about that. But I think it's a question sort of worth asking. Now, does that mean that the bridging movement has to be anti-Trump? I don't know that that's necessarily the case because we do need to be able to bring people in from across that divide. The way I have wanted to think about this is to think that what we want to do is left, right, and center, because you got polarizing people who pass themselves off as centrists, or you have polarizing centrists and whatnot. Left, right, and center find a way to call out and engage destructive behavior across the board while also trying to humanize where people may be coming from in terms of the best defenses of their positions and their way of doing politics that you can muster, and therefore call out certain behaviors while modeling something different, right? It's difficult with Trump because Donald Trump is seen as being so cynical in his politics and also is seen as sort of a salvific figure by many of his supporters. But if I were to try and steelman sort of a general defense of Donald Trump, what I might say, and if you read a book like Victor Davis Hanson's, A Case for Trump and whatnot, you'll get a more fully fleshed out intellectual defense of Trump in this way. But that Donald Trump, you can argue, even if you don't believe this is true, you can at least put yourself in the shoes of either Donald Trump or people who support him and say that Donald Trump came to the fore in American politics in a moment of time where it was generally felt by many conservatives, and maybe Trump himself felt this way, that the institutions of American society and the mainstream narrative of American culture was being gate-kept by a liberal elite that was dominant in every institutional plane, that really just framed everything in society in a way that made conservatives sort of guilty and backwards and stupid before they even showed up, right? And that just by virtue of being white, just by virtue of being religious, just by virtue of being rural or what have you, your identity nullified your policy conclusions before you even get to the table. And when you showed up in the way Mitt Romney did to that second debate with Barack Obama that Candy Crowley moderated way back in 2012, even the objective neutral journalists who are supposed to be fostering a civic exchange between Democrat and Republican will then jump in on the side of the Democrat to frame a certain question in a way that's meant to make the Republican look bad, right? So in other words, the liberals are supposed to be the referees in the form of the journalists and the professors and so forth, but really, this is something that's been rigged for the other side from the beginning. And in that context, what you need is a wrecking ball who will come in and not be so respectful of the norms that he won't be willing to fight the fight that needs to be fought for the survival of American democracy. I can understand the emotion of that. Do I agree with that analysis? Not necessarily. But I think that or if I do, maybe it's partial or what have you, but I think that that perspective needs to be one that the bridging movement is able to give some voice to, while still saying that the way that President Trump is pursuing, dialogue or certain ways of communicating politically and otherwise is nevertheless destructive to the democracy that we want to build. Am I going too far on that? Maybe. Or maybe I'm not going far enough. But we have to squarely wrestle with these tensions, right? Because there's a lot of things we've been tiptoeing around for a long time now in terms of how we relate to the elephants and the donkeys in the room, right? In terms of the individuals and the particular sorts of parties and media institutions and so forth, the influencers who are contributing to this problem in the way that they are. We have to figure out how to confront while also being healing and being constructive at the same time, and not just on the level of abstraction, but on the level of particulars. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Liz, I have so many thoughts on this, and this I think we're actually making real progress. In fact, I think these are actually the conversations that need to happen in the movement, but I will defer to you on where we want to go next.
Well, if you have any way to respond, if you want to respond to something, go ahead. And then actually, one of the things that this makes me think about is the theme of our Tocqueville quote, her ability to repair her flaws.
Mm.
And it makes me wonder, like at this moment that we're in, given, the trauma that we're going through in so many different ways, what can we learn from it that helps us then repair our faults? Because there are many.
Yeah, so when you think about repair and when you think about the explicit question that John Wood Jr. is proposing, which is that, what do you do with this Trump thing, right? So today I took there's a new political quiz out there, which I took with our team. And turns out my political party is nationalist, which I never would have thought.
There you go.
America first, and people are like, oh my God, Manu saying his politics. I think this is where we have to model. It's okay to talk about your politics. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
So it said I'm an institutionalist and a nationalist and a populist.
You're basically Steve Bannon.
I'm basically confused. No, I'm confused because institutionalist means I stand for institutions.
Well, that's
Populist means I'm critical of institutions. And nationalist means that apparently I stand for a country whose institutions I can't figure out what to do with.
You're just very empathetic, Manu.
That in a nutshell is a perfect example. And I'm 26. I'm still trying to figure out my views. If anyone wants to clip that, what they should know is like, I don't believe in the idea that you're born in the womb a Democrat or Republican. I'm still trying to figure it out. But I provide you that context because I asked myself, why am I so passionate about bridge? Like, why do I care about any of this stuff? Why does this matter? Because if I can answer that question for myself, I can convince that of other people and build a movement around it. And here's how this stitches back to someone like President Trump. The reason why I care about bridge is because I don't want to be exploited. We're all pawns in a game, and we're being exploited. And our job is to reveal that game and to break it. But not break the institutions of that game. Break the idea that outrage helps you win. It helps you win influence, and it helps you win elections.
We need to make it so it doesn't.
Yes. And what I mean by that is you need to demonstrate, upcoming political figures, growth-minded people, social media people, companies. You need to demonstrate that you can win with nuance and empathy. And you might say, oh my God, that sounds so cliche. We're doing it right now on social media, a place where nobody thought you could do it. And you might say, oh, that's just a flash in the pan because Charlie just got assassinated. I would go out to venture and say that of those 62,000 followers that we've gained, the amount of conversion we've driven to our chapters, we just launched this campaign called Be the Bridge. Would you check out right now? Be the Bridge. And the idea there is channel your sense of exploitation into real tangible progress. How does this relate to the Trump thing? Because President Trump took over the Republican Party by doing one thing. And that was he gave people a sense of an outlet for their deep exploitation, sense of exploitation. That's what happened. He showed people that you are being exploited, showed that the emperor has no clothes, and said, I'm the way. In some ways, when you think about the divide, the us versus them of open-minded versus closed-minded, trust versus mistrust, when you think about building relations with people that are different than ourselves, the way you win online, the way you win on the streets, the way you win in your family is by revealing the sense of exploitation that people have. And the last thing I'll say on this is there's a very tangible private sector example of this. So in the 90s and in the 80s, and Liz and John, you know this better than I do, all the ads that were anti-smoking were all about like people with their lungs, falling out. And you had crazy people with holes in their throats, and people are saying don't smoke, and it had no effect. So the anti-tobacco industry met in Florida in the mid 90s. They said, well, these ads aren't working, so what do we do? And so they got together and they said, well, how about we change the narrative, forget about smoking. We just say that your addiction is fueling the fat cats in New York, the tobacco industry. Nobody likes to be exploited. And you saw a literal reduction in smoking occurrences nationally after they spent 5 years hammering the tobacco industry. So I say all of this because I think, and people might think I'm naive for this, but I see this on chapters all the time. I actually think you can channel the Trump impulse because the reason why everybody votes for Trump, as according to John's narrative, is because they feel exploited by the liberal media. And the reason why all the liberals vote against Trump is because they feel like they're being exploited by the conservatives. And the fact is that all of us know that it's not the other side that's exploiting each other. It's that they've locked themselves in a system of outrage. So if you can convince people that they're being exploited and that the bridging space provides an outlet for that anger, I think it's really profound. So that's think about the Trump question.
The underdogs too.
Absolutely.
Even though we are the majority, but we are the underdogs, and it's a countercultural moment. I agree completely that you have to help people feel that sense of we are in this together. There's something that we're working on doing. And frankly, I'm pretty biased towards that storyline being, like you referred to, Manu. It is our founding, it's our founding ideals that we are still working to live into because it's never existed on planet Earth in the way that it was envisioned by our forefathers. So that's a pretty cool storyline. Let me go ahead and get to
answer.
Questions. Current events have revealed many areas of weakness in our American democracy.
Mm.
What of America's faults do you think have given rise to this moment, and what strengths do you see emerging in response repair?
Go
Well,
for it.
yeah, I mean, what faults of America um, giving rise to this present moment? I mean, I think that a lot of the present moment is an outgrowth of trends that um, some of it at least, a lot of it is an outgrowth of trends that it's hard to blame anybody for in a very sort of particular way. And by that, I mean that, I mean, on the one hand, I think that the acceleration of demographic diversity in American society is a major contributing factor to the overall fractiousness of the body politic. Doesn't mean that diversity is a bad thing in any principled way. I mean, we are defined by that in some meaningful to some meaningful degree, and yet demographic diversity has been dramatically accelerated since the 1960s in American society. The technological revolutions that we've lived through, obviously, human beings have innovated those developments, but most of us were not in a position to anticipate the way in which the rise of, I mean, just go back to the advent of the 24-hour news cycle and all the different cable channels, and then you get to the internet, and then you get to social media, and now we have artificial intelligence and so forth. These each of these factors are balkanizing the informational landscape and the social landscape in ways that make this problem so much more pernicious. I guess if I were to attribute it to a fault of Americans, though, I do think that the materialism of American society and the individualism of American society become real weaknesses in terms of our ability to value the right things, including our relationships to each other and understanding what it takes to sort of maintain those relationships. I think we've
And how,
become, yeah.
and how about strengths that you see emerging in response?
Well, I mean, I think that there is a rich American, I think there is a rich American legacy to draw on with respect to the democratic craft of pursuing understanding and compromise across some of these divisions. We have This is a nation of civic innovation, if no other nation has ever been, right? And I think our work, in a humble way, is an expression of that, right?
Agree completely.
We don't take it for granted that self-government works automatically. And if we do start to take that for granted, then reality, kicks us in the head the way that it's doing now, and we wake up to that and we begin to innovate ways of being able to rebuild the bridge, right? And so I think that impulse towards civic innovation is very much a strength of the United States of America and the American people, and that we are witnessing that bubble up in some of the trend lines that Manu Meel was highlighting.
Want to throw in Manu or another question?
No, let's do another question.
All right, so this is kind of interesting. I find it paradoxical that it seems to be necessary for us to form personal relationships and build trust with those
Mhm.
we disagree with in order to be able to focus on the non-personal ideas that will ultimately solve our problems. It seems like that we are not really moving beyond tribalism as much as we are expanding the tribe, which
Mm.
which is kind of a little bit of kind of what you were arguing, Manu.
Mhm.
I think that's exactly right. As John said, and as we talked about earlier, uh, we've never been a species without a tribe. If our job was to convince humans to not be humans, we would fail. We don't even need to, we can pack up shop and leave.
Mhm.
The fact is that the question that I'm really interested in right now is, what is our tribe? What does it stand for? What does it stand against? And most importantly, what happens if this tribe succeeds? What does success look like? What does success look like? If you can get to a point where you can understand that success, in my case, in my view, is not necessarily a specific policy outcome, because as I said before, Zoran's not getting anything done over the next 4 years. It doesn't take a
Mhm.
genius to see that. And it's not an anti-Zoran thing. You could take it on any side, because there's a system that is against the ways in which action is happening. So the more important question is, how do we actually build and think through success. And the two quick things I'll offer is I think one, success for me is e pluribus una. Out of many, one. I want every policy, every action, every idea, everything one says in American democracy to be answered through one filter. Will this make it so that we are a society where it's out of many plus one? Or is this a society in which we degrade against that? And the second thing, simple success, is that you have an American experiment where people are not rid of conflict, because I don't think you can solve for that, but where they have the right mechanisms to exercise their conflict. And here's the thing, none of this is testament. We're at an exciting time in the bridging industry and bridging field. I said the word industry, by the way.
Mhm.
New York Times calls it Kumbaya Industrial Complex. And you know what? I'll take it. At least I'm not part of the military industrial complex. So the
The
exciting thing
Kumbaya
about
industrial context.
yeah, the exciting thing about this moment is like we're trying to figure out these things because we actually see hope. There's actual tactics, and people are actually winning. And so that's what I would offer. But I think that's the next big question that our movement's gonna have to answer is what does success look like?
Right.
Well, it strikes me that I think that we often get all hooked up in, and solving problems is important. Obviously, it's what we have to do together. But the very feature of a multi ethnic, huge democracy with 330 million people in it is we're always going to disagree, right? To your point, Manu, we have to be able to, the book, How Democracies Die, they compare it to a pickup game of basketball where we have to keep playing. That's the whole thing. And without, I mean, one of the reasons we don't solve problems, frankly, is because we're not talking to each other. And usually the people who don't see it your way can see what's wrong with the idea that you have. And so all of our ideas are just completely siloed and insular and haven't been, stress tested against reality, right? So to me, it's that it's something that we do all the time. And that is the special idea of our framing.
Mm.
We have a way to work out our disagreements without killing each other.
Right.
I agree.
Having a compelling vision of what you're against, what you are for, and who
What
we
does success
are,
look like? That's
and what
right.
does success look like. Those might actually be sort of the four sort of pillars of the table, potentially.
Yeah.
What are you
Yeah.
for? What are you against? Who are you? And what does it look like for you to succeed?
Well, in fact, that actually taps into another question we've got. What's your advice for someone who's struggling to speak out and stand up for their firmly held values while not isolating from those with different values and political opinions?
I can be super quick on this, John. I'll pass this to you. I think this might be I don't know if this is our last question, but just very quickly on this, I would say that the feeling you feel is a feeling that everyone feels right now. I've yet to meet someone that's like, I'm having a great time talking to everybody and sharing my beats. Everyone feels that tension. And so it's important to know you're the majority. And the second thing I'll just articulate there, John had alluded to this earlier as it relates to the trust point, is that um, uh, what is the alternative? What happens if you don't engage? That's the real question. What happens if you don't have that conversation? Just ask yourself that, and then just weigh the consequences. If you
Well,
feel
we're seeing some of the consequences every day now, right? Not
that's
engaged.
all I got on that question. I don't know, John, if you have anything else.
Yeah. Well, I would say have compassion, feel compassion for the people who think differently than you do. If you feel a deep compassion of the person who vehemently disagrees with you on race, on foreign policy, on whatever it is, if that is a sincere feeling inside of you, if you can put yourself sort of in their mindset, it has a way of crowding out your own sort of fear or anxiety or insecurity about being able to say what it is you have to say. You sort of flip the power dimension within your own mind, within your own psychology. Because suddenly, what you have is somebody else who just doesn't really have the opportunity to sort of see things in the way that you have been able to see them. Which means you actually have something to give to them if you're coming from the vantage point of not wanting to defeat or beat them, but rather from the vantage point of hoping to edify. And so this takes me to this, to the sort of the biblical idea that love edifies, right? That is what Dr. King's philosophy was about. This idea of agape love, goodwill, and so forth. if you have something that is true and you see somebody else as being able to benefit from that or be completed by that, you can speak your truth in a way that is coming from a posture of being able to give something of value rather than beating somebody with a rhetorical weapon.
That's a great
Um,
I agree with
right.
that 100%, that you're giving something to them. Yeah.
Exactly. And if that is your earnest disposition, then you have fundamentally transformed your own relationship to the act of speaking your mind. There's nothing to fear in doing so at that point because there's nothing fearful about the party to whom you are speaking. Quite the opposite. You have compassion for them, right? And that becomes the emotion through which that articulation comes forward.
All right, you guys are kind of edging towards the last
Mm,
question that I had. So I'm going to pause for just a second before I ask it. And also, we'll be putting links again to so that you can get familiar with Manu's work and with John's work. And I encourage you all to follow them on social media and just, you are meeting two people who are really kind of the beating heart of what it is we're doing together. And gosh, there are just so many people who are doing this work who are just extraordinary, like John and Manu. Um, so here's my question. Manu, you said when we chatted a little bit before this gathering, you said that we have a challenge kind of inherent in this work to recruit people who are angry to build a movement based on love.
mm,
Mhm.
And John, I'm going to read a little clip from just a beautiful. We'll put the link for this piece up too. A beautiful piece that you wrote in USA Today on getting Dr. King's legacy right.
mm,
Um, and you wrote, in King's view, the racists of American society were themselves victims, alongside the people they victimized. Understandably, this degree of compassionate empathy for oppressors was something that many people supportive of King's political agenda simply could not embrace. Yet it was the power of this compassion that elevated King and the nonviolent movement to the level of a moral force, speaking not only to the conscience of America, but to the world. We are not used to loving one another across our political conflicts in America today, but that is to our detriment. And you talked about a particular kind of love. So I guess I want the two of you to kind of contemplate this complexity. We're angry. Um, there's hatred is on the rise.
mm.
How do we wrestle it into respect and even a certain kind of love?
Yeah. Well, we're human beings, right? So we will fail if we try to excise any of these parts of us from the body of our emotions. But what we can do is make that visceral anger that we feel something that is channeled in service of a higher ideal, the higher things that we strive towards, right? So don't eliminate your anger, but allow it to serve a righteous cause and in a righteous sort of way. These things don't their intention, but they don't necessarily have to conflict. If you didn't have the anger, you would be passive. You would be sort of supinely accepting of injustice and just sort of the drift of our society into decay and deterioration and into chaos. We should be angry about what's happening, but that anger can express itself through the valence of through the vehicle of love and compassion ultimately, right? And if you can figure out how those two things connect, then you can speak with power. And if our movement can do that writ large, then we can become a moral force for the repair of our democracy.
You know, uh, I love John's analysis oftentimes of Dr. King, the way he's educating in the civil rights movement. And so I'll offer sort of a broad view on this, which is that I don't think our job is to tell people to stop being angry. I don't think our job is to, in some ways, tell people that their anger should not be mobilized towards something, because that's a human condition. People are angry, they want to fix stuff. But I think what the greatest social change makers of the 20th century understood, people like Mahatma Gandhi in the Salt March in 45, to Dr. King in the 60s, to Nelson Mandela in the 90s, is that there are many ways to deploy your anger. And the question is, what method of deployment in the moment you live in is most effective? So what are the different deployment methods? You've got free speech, you've got journalism, you've got violence, you have civil disobedience, and you have this thing called dialogue. And the question that I think we have to use, or the norm and understanding that we have to deploy in this moment, is the same thing we deploy in our relationship with a spouse, with your sister, with your mom, with your dad, which is judgment. If I hit my mom over the head with facts right now, is she going to change her mind?
Mhm.
Probably not. But if I, maybe have a conversation, I listen to her, she listens to me, I might make some progress. I just utilize judgment. Does that mean that now all of a sudden I've surrendered all my moral convictions because I had a conversation? No, of course not. It's about judging the moment. So the question is, how do you deploy your anger? And my view is just very simply, if you live in a society of 330 million people that are all different and care, that's why they're all angry. I think hitting people over the head with violence, protest, disobedience may not do the trick. Just look at the last 10 years. Maybe it's dialogue. So that's how I think about anger as it relates to the ways in which we deploy our feelings.
Gentlemen, what a wonderful conversation this is. I am so glad to have spent this time with you. It's really personally meaningful to me in a way that I
Us
can't
too,
quite.
Liz. Thank you for the platform you built and all that you've done for the
Mhm.
space.
Uh,
Absolutely.
it really has just been a joy, and I love you guys, and I'm pretty sure that even more people know why after this evening. So thank you for spending time with us.
Mm.
And thank you to all of you who are listening and participating. On behalf of our host, Florida Humanities, the Village Square, and our streaming partners, we'd like to thank you for joining us tonight. Good night, everybody. Thank you, guys.
Thank
See
you all.
John.
Good night.
Corey Nathan back with you. This conversation offered a clear reminder that democracy is less a machine and more a relationship. As John Wood Jr. said, this is a nation of civic innovation, and that innovation depends on citizens willing to do the simple but difficult work of listening to one another. Manu challenged us to remember that we have never been a species without a tribe. And yet, America has always tried to be something larger than tribal instincts alone. His description of the country as an awesome aberration captures both the fragility and the promise of this moment. And Liz brought it back to the everyday level with a simple truth: showing up matters. Even one of my favorites, Edmund Burke, made an appearance along the way, reminding us that societies break down when trust erodes and rebuild when people choose to repair what has been damaged. With that, it's time to close out today. Please consider joining our members in supporting this programming. You can become a member for just $7 a month or $76 a year, and your business can join for $250. Go to villagesquare.us/donate to join today. That's villagesquare.us/donate. While you're there, sign up for Village Square's newsletter to stay up to date with everything happening at the Village Square. Just head to villagesquare.us and scroll to the bottom for the sign-up box, or you can do it right as the pop-up happens when you go to the site. Village Squarecast is funded in part by Florida Humanities with support from the Federation of State Humanities Councils and the Mellon Foundation. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of our funders. Learn more about Florida Humanities online at floridahumanities.org. We appreciate you listening to America at 250, her ability to repair her faults. Until next time, we challenge you to reach out with an open heart and mind to someone who doesn't look or think like you. It changes everything. We'll talk to you soon, and thanks so much for listening to Village Squarecast.